Hey, welcome to Pop Culture. Let's talk about your second essay assignment, the Fables analysis. So this assignment is hopefully straightforward, although I know a lot of people will say it's not, and it's true. It's a little challenging, especially because I can't tell you exactly what to write about or how to write about it. So in this, I just want to explain what I'm looking for. So it's similar to the previous essay you did, the cultural snapshot, in the sense that it's 2 to 3 pages. If you want to work with others, you can work with others. Just hand in one, submit one essay among you, and make sure your names are on it if you do that. It should be cited, like you should cite your sources, and so you can use APA, MLA, Chicago even. And also you want to make sure that you make an argument here. So your argument should be something to the effect of, in Fables, this is happening. And this, whatever this is up to you. And the way that you know that you're doing a good job on this is that it's not super obvious, but it's also supported by evidence. And so what I mean by that is, you could say, in Fables, Bigby Wolf is a wolf. And so you're not wrong. I mean, he is a wolf, that's the character, but also nobody is going to read that and say, damn, I didn't realize that when I read Fables. And so you know that that's not a really good argument. You could also say something crazy, like Bigby Wolf is a unicorn. And there's no evidence to back that up, and it's not true. And so then you're just making a really bad argument, and so people wouldn't have thought of it, but also there's a reason they didn't think of it. It's dumb. What you want to do is look through the comic. Think about what captured your attention, and that might be visually. So you might have seen images that really you found provocative or you found interesting, or you might see text that, it's interesting that they were using these terms or these words. Or maybe there's a combination. I mean, comics are all about the combination of words and images, right? Maybe you found a certain element of the plot interesting for you, or maybe you found a certain motif, something that keeps coming up, something visually or aesthetically or even rhetorically that, appears a few times in the story, and you want to ask, why is that there? What does that tell us? Earlier, we talked about briefly the intersection of Bullfinch and Kipling, right? And so that's an example. I don't want you to do this because we've already talked about it, so I better not see essays on this. But that's a great example of something you can look into, right? You can say, this is the intersection, and that's, nobody can debate that. You can show the picture, you can have a figure saying, page 1 or whatever, this is the intersection. But then you can do additional research and say, this is Bullfinch's work on mythology and how Willingham used that to help him construct his story. And so he places that at one side, one street, and the other street, Kipling, because he's clearly influenced by these stories by Rudyard Kipling, and here we find evidence in the book, right? So that could be an argument that you could explain in a few pages by doing additional research on maybe interviews with the author, Willingham, looking at the works of Bullfinch and Kipling and asking how they relate to each other, and then asking ultimately why, or explaining why, by the end of your essay, why it's important that we find ourselves at this intersection early in the comic. So it's a layered analysis. There's different ways to talk about this: implicit, explicit, manifest, latent. You want to think about the readings that you've done because you want to incorporate at least one of them. So maybe Freud and the idea of the dream work appeal to you. Maybe Marxist cultural analysis appeals to you. You're welcome to look at other things, but Raymond Williams is a great author. Stuart Hall is a great author. We're going to be reading more great authors, but we have hegemony, ideology, the dream work, and a number of other ideas that you can build on. So you can ask yourself, maybe what's being represented here? What's the manifest content, so like the intersection, and then what's the latent content, the heredity or the building on this work by a new author, and which is what comics are like, but also what Fables is especially like, right? So you can come up with an interesting argument by simply looking through. There are a lot of these, and I hope that you've already maybe found some and started thinking about them. As I said, I can't do it for you because if I did it for you, I wouldn't be interested in your work. Like, I'd already know it, right? So I want you to think about what is present in the comic, but that you can look even deeper into and establish even more knowledge about. So explain it. So like, no one will debate, Snow White is basically in charge of Fabletown. No one will debate that these are characters from children's books primarily, but that they are in a more adult situation in this. So that's obvious. But then you can ask, why make this choice of how to represent somebody? Or why use these conventions from a hard-boiled detective story? And why make it in Manhattan in New York? There are a number of things that you can just ask yourself. And then if you can look into it a little bit and come up with an argument like, I think the choice of this color in this scene really helps make this point. Or I think that the repetition of this theme, which they say multiple times throughout the book, helps illustrate something that Willingham is trying to get across, then you're probably on the right track. You're always welcome to email me and say, hey, I think this is an interesting layer or dimension to the comic that I'd like to explore a little bit. And it's important that you do at least two things. You come up with an argument, but that you back up that argument by doing your own research. One of the things that people do that, ends up not being a great essay is that they just, talk off the cuff, or it seems like they just write it the night before off the top of their head. And so that's really obvious when that happens because there's no research done, right? I don't know a lot about, royalty and kings and queens and stuff like that, but if I were to think about how royalty is portrayed in the comic, I could go and do some research on royalty and how historically they've been represented and how they're represented in the comic, and hopefully come up with a more informed argument than if I were just like, kings and queens exist. I know this off the top of my head, and there's kings and queens represented here, so there's my argument, right? That's like the worst kinds of essays I get. The best kinds of essays I get make me look at it and say, wow, I didn't realize that, or I never put that together, and that's a really interesting point, right? You never get to that by doing it the night before and making stuff up. What you want to do is you find something that, just Roland Barthes we'll talk about later in a different class lecture, but he talks about it as sort of like pricking you, right? It just like pops into your head, and then you start thinking more and more about a topic or a theme or an idea. You go out and do some research, and you realize, wow, they use a lot of purple. Purple's a royal color, and it was actually royal because it was hard to get before we had contemporary chemicals and engineering and stuff like that. And so if you had purple robes, that you looked very regal, and so they even had laws saying that poor people couldn't wear purple. And there's a whole history, like in terms of the fashion that royalty wore, that you could look at in terms of how it's represented here. I've had actually a few essays on that before, which is really interesting. But all you got to do is look through that comic and ask yourself, what's here, but that can be further unpacked or explored or researched, and how might I do that? And then you just start building on that. So again, you look through it, it takes you a little bit of time to come up with something good. You're not going to have this immediately, which is why you need to give yourself a little bit of time. And then you come up with an argument. I think that in Fables, the choice to do this, or to represent this, or to have this reappear a number of times, or to reference Lewis Carroll, or to reference this, medieval fairy tale or whatever, I think that means something, or I think that reveals something, or I think that illustrates an important point about the comic, or about Willingham's interpretation of contemporary society, or whatever, right? It's up to you to come up with a good argument. It's not hard if you give yourself some time to look through it, to think about it, and to do additional research. What is hard is coming up with it the day before, and so that's why I want you to give it a little thought. You'll see the requirements are here. You'll see that, again, 2 to 3 pages, double spaced, Times New Roman is a good idea. Make sure your name is on it. Make sure, it's nice to give it a title. I don't grade your title, but make it look professional, I hope. If you look up APA or MLA style, you'll easily find examples of that. And yeah, I'm here to help answer questions, but I do look forward to it. Like I said, the most sort of invigorating reads are the ones that make me say, wow, I have read that book, but I never saw that in it. And that's a great thought that this person has further explored by doing their own research. The worst ones are ones that say like, Snow White is a character from Disney's Snow White. I don't care. Like, first of all, we know that. Secondly, you're not bringing anything. So bring something. It doesn't have to be world-changing, earth-shattering. It just has to say, look, there's this thing that anyone who read the book would see, but I bet you might not have thought about the implications or about the background of this or whatever the case. Have fun with it. The best essays are also ones that you enjoy writing, because I can tell that you've enjoyed it, you've looked into it, you've done that extra work because you found it interesting, and then I'm much more likely to find it interesting. Good luck to you. I look forward to seeing these Fables analyses.